All righty. Hello, everyone. Matthew Hagum again from the Accounting Alchemy Network. If this is your first time watching anything from us, I guess this is not again, but we have plenty of amazing content on our YouTube channel. And for those of you who are brand new to the Accounting Alchemy Network, we are a grassroots movement empowering accountants to transform the world. Our vision is to create a world where accounting professionals are a positive force in developing a sustainable and regenerative global ecosystem and culture. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website, accountingalchemy.net. I highly recommend you sign up for our newsletter. That's our number one way of getting the info out about our amazing events like today's event, which is going to be super special. We have a special guest, a special guest with us, who's representing the Pachamama Alliance. We have an amazing ongoing relationship with them, sharing some of their amazing educational content with our community of accounting professionals who want to take action and change the world and be the change that they want to see in the world. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Ingrid, who's going to introduce our guests and get us started on today's conversation. Over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you, Matthew. Yes, Ingrid Edstrom, co-founder of the Accounting Alchemy Network, and I'm really excited to invite Will Grant to join us today. Will is one of the people who's created a lot of the educational content that we here in the Accounting Alchemy Network have been partaking in. Dozens of our members have now been through the Game Changer Intensive, and we are also looking at supporting our members with action training coming up in the near future. And Will is one of the creators of that content. And in particular, one of the pieces of content that we get into in the Game Changer Intensive is something called the 4 levels of action. And members who have gone through the Game Changer have been like, ooh, we want to learn more about that. So we've invited Will to come and talk with us more about that. But first, Will, would you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to come to this. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think the Accounting Alchemy Network is one of the groups that is it's doing really vital and important work. The relationship between finances and personal finance and the regenerative world is something that a lot of people think is maybe in contradiction to each other, rather than being that accounting is one of the most powerful ways that people can change the world. So really excited to be on this call. A little about me. So I work with Pachamama Alliance. I've worked for the past 5 years, and I was consulting for 5 years before that. And I have an eclectic background that comes together in things. I've worked at the intersection of social change and education for the past 30 years. And initially, my focus was really on social justice and looking at organizational change and education systems. But then back in 2002, I started to focus much more on the environment and issues of regeneration, systems of regeneration, and how those come together. And my other thing is but my biggest query in my life has been, how do people learn how to make change in their own lives and the lives of the systems where they live? And so that's led me on everything from starting my own company and running that for 10 years, working on social justice, to working on state policy questions. And then I have a stint in the corporate and the tech world where I was working on organizational development and consulting, and then also working a lot with social movements. And I think in the eclectic background, the core thing is, how do people learn how to come together in order to see what's happening in the world collectively and actually understand and agree with what is happening, the good and the crisis. Then coming up with a sense of what are the futures that they actually want to create, and then gaining the political skills to actually implement them. And then the other thing that I'd say is, within that, what's been increasingly a part of my life is the role of spirituality and connection to the earth and listening to guidance. That for a long time in my life, that was something which was it was my own personal guidance, but it wasn't something that I brought into my work. I felt nervous to talk about that, but that is increasingly something which I think is really important, that whatever somebody's faith tradition is, but that social change is so often guided by forces that are larger and wiser than us, and bring that into the mix and the conversation as well. So
I
that's my
love
background.
that. And I feel like that's one of the pieces that the Pachamama Alliance really supports with, and one of the reasons why we love using the Pachamama education to support people in stepping into activism rather than trying to come up with our own education models. We're like, let's use this model that's working really well already And there's that beautiful foundation of looping in our personal spiritual beliefs and values into the work that we're doing and not telling people what to believe, just whatever you believe, how do you live that? And that's so wonderful. And I also love that you touched on this, the background in state policy and corporate and tech, and like you've got a lot of background in a huge diverse array of areas. And I know for myself, I've really, really enjoyed having you as a friend and mentor, someone that who's got a lot of experience. And it can be like, I'm going to ask Will about this. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being part of our lives and for being joining us for this call. So, four levels of action. I'm wondering if you would be interested in giving us just a little bit of a description of the four levels of action, kind of the Cliff's Notes as it's described in the Game Changer, even like just a little higher level than that. And then we can get into the nitty-gritty weeds of how can we apply this in the accounting profession? Because that's the big question that people who've been through GCI are wondering of like, okay, yes, but how do I apply this specifically in my life?
By way of intro, let me start by saying that where this came from was having worked at a lot of different levels of social change and noticing that the dialogue is often about which is the right level of action for people to take in. It's like, people who will say like, no, if there isn't personal change, then nothing matters, or like personal change is irrelevant. We have to have systemic change, otherwise it's irrelevant. It's whatever, like the whole dialogue often around social change, right way to do it. And what I reflected on as I was thinking about that was, well, they're all critical and they're all interrelated. And people can actually be involved at all four levels, multiple levels of change. The question is where they're going to be able to be the most effective. Right? And so that's where the four levels of action came out. It was experientially being involved in all sorts of those different systems of change. So the idea is level one is personal change. It's, what can I do in myself and in my life? Level two is friends and family, right? The people who I'm closely connected with, and what can I do to help, to be involved with changing our lives of my friends and my friends and family and community. Level three is organizations, institutions, the town that I live in, the city that I live in, but a big one is the places where I work. And the idea is that these are organizations and institutions that are great, are larger than me, but where I have an identity. I have a membership in these in some way or another, even if it's just that I am a member of my town, or if I'm in a big city, I'm a member of my borough, right? It's something where that is. And then level four is the big grand world of change. And it's very broad. It's, I call it society, economy, culture, the internet. It's all of those kind of massive levels of change. That's where like national policy would come into. And people are often kind of like, where's the line between that? And the way that I say it, my definition of level three is if I can, with about 2 weeks of work, get into a conversation with somebody who's in a position of decision making, that's a pretty good definition of level three. Right? And say, I actually think level three is the place where people can have the most impact. Because if somebody gets solar panels on the roof of their church, they have not only done that for that church, but for hundreds of people that were involved in it. If they get the school to change where it sources its food from, right, they've impacted the lives of thousands. But that is something that people can actually do. So that's the quick news.
That's really great. Thank you, Will. I guess my initial question is, right, so we work with a lot of accounting professionals, right? And there's sort of a question about, well, two questions, like, well, several questions come up. I mean, first of all, I think one of the realities that occurs is a sense of overwhelm, right? It's like, oh, there's so much work to do. It feels like astronomical. It's like what we have to move, not just a mountain, 5 mountains across the country. Like this is so much work, right, to do. It's like what difference am I going to even be able to make? And not only what difference, but like how do I actually even begin that journey and ultimately sort of overcome the overwhelm of that initial sort of like, oh my gosh, moment. And so I guess I'm curious, you know, And I'll sort of preface this by saying, one of the things that we do spend a lot of time doing, I think, with new members in the Accounting Alchemy Network, and certainly through the Game Changer Intensive, is we focus on maybe that first level of awareness, right, and understanding what's going on, and then maybe building a personal relationship to what's going on, and then understanding how that sort of like personal relationship to what's happening in the world starts internally so that you can face the overwhelm. But I'm kind of curious, like, when somebody is ignited with the desire to want to make a difference, but they sort of are hit with that initial wave of overwhelm, what invitation or suggestions do you have for people who are arriving at that moment before they feel compelled to be able to take action that feels meaningful for them?
So that was a core of the reason that I created the 4 levels of action, was because I think our dialogue around change is actually, it's structured as innately overwhelming or irrelevant. Like, I feel like that's kind of, it's like, my thing is like, and when I was working with teens a lot back around 2010, and they were like, we're told that climate change is a catastrophe that is at a global level. And then when we ask what we do, we're told to recycle our Starbucks cup, change our light bulb, and write our congressperson. And that's it. That's it. Those are the options. Or like dedicate your entire life to the process of changing the entire economic structure of the world. Those are your options, right? And so, and the thing is, so what I realized is, so that, changing your light bulbs and Starbucks cups, that's level 1. Write your congressperson is level 4, right? And there was like this whole thick range in the middle of people being able to take action. So the first thing is just to say there are levels of action, and each one of them has their strengths and disadvantages, and find the level at which you feel like you can work with. And the biggest thing that I think is work at the level of change where you already have connections, where you already have people who will listen to you. And that's why level 1, kind of the personal level, is the easiest. It's like, you can change your life. You have a lot of control over it, right? And so it is stuff like, great, start with that Starbucks cup, right? But then start to think about, well, where do I get my food from? And am I going to pay a little bit more to be regenerative, and organic, so that I'm not contributing to putting pesticides in the world? Great. Where does my power come from? Do I have options to shift the way that, I'm getting power into my house? Like, is there municipal solar that's maybe a little bit more expensive? Okay, do that. That's a no-brainer. Oh, I have to get solar panels. That's more expensive. All right, well, let me actually investigate what that's going to do. It's like looking at the process of change and figuring out and getting involved in it. Because the thing about the personal level is that's where somebody figures out what the process of change is going to be like for themselves. And that's going to make it a lot easier to have the next level of change, which is to think about, well, who among my friends and family could I talk with? And maybe get them engaged to do this change with me. Because the other thing I learned from teenagers is social change should always be an opportunity to socialize. They taught me that. And at first I was like, kind of a grouchy, hard-bitten movement person. And I was like, no, it's to save the world. And they were like, no, it's not. It should always be fun. And over time, I realized they're totally right. So finding your friends and family who want to do this with you. So don't try to change, right? The uncle who hates, who's like been an oil person for their entire life and, doesn't want to get into the conversation. Don't try to change that person. Change the person who's already interested in the conversation with you. And then you have a friend to do it with, and somebody to like have an excuse, have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, and figure out what you're going to do next, right? And that's that element of creating the connections. And we'll talk more about level 3 as we go forward. But I would even say that that's a big way that I think of, like, don't try to change an institution where you have no connection to. Like, don't try to change City Hall if you have no connections at City Hall, right? Start with the PTA that you're going to, right? If you're part of a faith community, start in the faith community. Start with your kid's soccer team. Start with your bridge club, like whatever it is, right? It's like where you already have connections, so that there's a personal element to it. And last thing I'll say by way of big picture is, people we need to change the entire globe. We need to change the entire structure of capitalism. That's true, right? We also need to change the entirety of the modern world's relationship to the natural world and understand that we are part of an ecosystem, not separate from it. That's true too. But here's the thing. If we change laws at the international national level, those all still have to trickle down to the change of what happens at our schools and our temples and our mosques and our city hall. And then it has to trickle down to what we do in our homes and in our families. And then it has to trickle down to how we change our actual lives. All four levels are necessary. And just to give two quick statistics for this, an organization called Rewiring America was looking at what is happening in terms of how we generate power and moving towards renewable energy. And they found that 42% of the United States carbon output comes from what they call 5 kitchen table decisions. And it's like how we heat our home, how we power our home, and what we do with our car, right? It's like decisions like that. 42% of the carbon output in the United States comes down to things that people talk about that are just about how we live our lives day to day. That is huge. Let it give is that, for those who are in the know, the Biden administration actually had a superb set of climate laws called the Inflation Reduction Act. And it created all of these incentives to move towards a renewable economy. And then it took so long to implement that even though there was literally over $400 billion available, so little actually got done because state laws and county laws and local laws were not ready for the switch to renewable. And so it required people getting it up and getting involved in what was just happening in their towns and cities and schools in order to make it happen. So when people think local change doesn't matter, small change doesn't matter, I'm like, actually, we are just living in the situation where most people don't even know that we had this massive law, and people didn't realize that the vast majority of the change that needed to happen at their local level. So again, you don't have to go to City Hall yet, but I'm going to convince you by the end of this call that you should, right? And that you can, right? But that change that people make, it matters. But start with your own life. Start with friends and families, and then build outwards from there.
I love that. And I also love just this idea of really honing down into the lower levels. And one of the things that we often talk about in the Accounting Alchemy Network is our values within the Accounting Alchemy Network and our values as individual people. And it reminds me a lot of what Arkan Luswala talks about in the Game Changer Intensive. And for those who have not gotten to see a video with Arkan Luswala yet, please join us for a Game Changer Intensive. And he talks about how we need to know what we can be before we can know what we can do. And accountants need to be human beings before we can do accounting. So how do we be human? What does that look like? And focusing on that level 1, I think it's important to have a solid foundation of level 1 and level 2 before just diving into levels 3 and 4 and figuring out how are we going to change the world and going to City Hall. What are our values? How do those values show up in each of our daily lives through our daily actions? Are we taking care of ourselves? Do we know what our values are? Do we have an idea of what our spiritual beliefs, our spiritual identity is, and how that spirituality shows up in our daily lives, whatever that is for each of us? We're not telling anyone else what to believe. Yep. And when it comes to money and finance, which is one of the main energy flows in our dominant paradigm currently, how does that impact our lives? How do we feel about money and finance? That is level 1 work. If we are, recognizing that accountants are notoriously time poor and, trying to get all this stuff done, and that many of us are advising people on their business and personal finances on the day to day, but at the same time, how are each of our business and personal finances doing? And is there maybe some imposter syndrome going into the conversations we're having with others on a professional level? And how do we feel about the financial decisions that we're making on the day to day? Are they in alignment with our values? Are we investing our hard-earned money into the things that we believe in? Or are we doing things on a day to day that are kind of eroding our values and beliefs? The current growth for growth's sake capitalist system really has many of us sacrificing our deeply held values on the altar of profit every day, as if profit is the only thing that matters. If that's something that's going on for us, what do we do about it? That's level one decision making. That's the kind of thing that simply pausing to reflect and meditate goes a really long way. And then getting into level two, how do we have those conversations about whatever revelations we're having within ourselves and our own values, beliefs, spirituality around these big decisions? How do we have those conversations with our families? I know one of the main causes of divorce in America is that partners are not able to talk with each other about money. You know, who's hiding their gambling addiction and who's spending money on who knows what that's not in agreement. And yeah, how do we have those conversations in well ways and recognize that every financial decision that we make can be an expression of our values? Are our values shared with the human beings who are closest to us in our daily lives? Those are really important things to look at that are not small things. That is big work. And I personally feel like we each need to be doing those level one and level two elements often before we can really effectively get into level three. Because if we don't have that foundation, then the level three is not going to be as effective. What do you think about that, Will?
I agree with so much of it, like that kind of the role in the personal and kind of what you're bringing into it. And the one exception that I want to add to it, or the yes and that I want to give, is people don't have to have worked through all of those questions before they can start to do social change, right?
Correct. Yes. I didn't mean we had to be perfect before we could try it. Oh, you're frozen.
Message that I got recently. Oh, let's see. Yeah, my internet's a little bit bulky. Apologies. I
Okay,
think
go
it's
back
on
10
my end.
seconds. Yeah.
Okay. Something that I want to offer that I got as a lesson recently. I realized the next day I needed to give a talk to a room full of people who work in AI around spirituality. And I was just like, I am so outmatched. What am I doing? And as I was just being quiet and praying about it, what I was told was, no, no, no. Your struggles, your incompleteness, right? Your contradictions, all the things that you don't know, that's exactly what you need to bring into this conversation. Like, don't come in with perfection. There's, literally, there are other folks who are like indigenous spiritual leaders. They're like, they will do that. What people need is to feel that change is accessible and it's a journey that we take one step at a time. And so, in this, like in that sense of when people often feel like, well, either I can't do this, I'm too contradictory, I haven't worked these things out myself, how would I dare talk to anybody, tell anybody else what they should do? It's actually like it's completely great to go in and say, I'm still living this question. I am far from regenerative. I have a fossil fuel burning car. I have, these things. I still fly for vacation. I'm still working through these things. But I also know there's places where I can get better. And I want to get into this conversation with people to figure out what we can do. And here's what I have to offer. So that's all I would say. But then the integrity is to genuinely be in the questions and to genuinely be looking at each one of our lives to figure out what we feel we want to do with it, what works for us, what doesn't. Yeah. And I think that creates an ability for people to feel like they can get out there. We're not asking you to be a leader, like a moral model. We're asking you to wrestle with the questions with people.
So I love that because I think, it create, your own vulnerability creates the space for others to be vulnerable as well, right? It's like, oh, yeah. Oh, you don't have that figured out. I don't have that figured out either. Great, let's figure it out together, right? Kind of a thing. And I love that because, it's like it creates the opportunity for curiosity, right? Like shared curiosity and it creates, I think, space for like therefore communal learning of like of like, oh, okay, I'm sort of staring at these you know plant beds outside of my window and I'm reflecting on, oh yeah, my mom is planting those things, and then before this call I was sort of rotating some compost that was out by my barn, and like that's something that I didn't do last year, and I want to throw a shout out to Ingrid because she had me like shoveling compost in her bins last summer, and it just kind of like sparked the thing. Right. But then I was like, the whole reason why I have the compost bin is because, the year prior to that, my boyfriend had given me this sort of, he's like, oh, you want this? I was like, sure, why not? Right. And so, and so I'm even acknowledging that, like, in my own transformation, the opportunities for the change occurred because I was interacting with people who were also at different stages of the journey and able to be like, oh, you need a compost bin? Here you go. Oh, you want to know how composting works? Well, come see how I do it, right? And then anyway, so it's sort of really cool because you get to kind of naturally unfold. It's not like, I think there's sort of the other thing that, I talked about the sort of wave of I guess fear and anxiety that comes when you sort of realize how much change needs to occur. And then all of a sudden I think one of the other reactions is like, I got to stop everything I'm doing and only do this for the rest of my life. And granted, I think that would, some people, myself and Ingrid perhaps included, are like, yes, welcome to the club. And also, it doesn't have to happen overnight, right? It's like the journey of building these gardens in my yard has been a multi-year project, right? This composting thing has been a year-long project. And so I think there's sort of an acknowledgement of, like, you start with yourself, you start in your community, and you do one thing at a time, and you let it happen, and you stay with the curiosity. And I guess where I get curious, so one of the things that I really appreciated about the Game Changer Intensive, and particularly this round, there was sort of a worksheet at the very back end of it, right? That was basically a what's yours to do kind of a worksheet.
The
And
action plan.
exactly, the action plan. And which is great for accountants, by the way. So, because we're all, I think somebody mentioned this in our GC, it's like, oh, it's a checklist. I can fill it out and get the things done and da da da. So there you go, accountants, you have your checklist. Take GCI and then you get your checklist as your reward. But I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, so I've got, I've done some internal work. I've got my gardens going. I'm working with my mom. Like, we're doing some community, like, we're doing some family stuff around these things. And now I'm getting curious about my neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a school down the street, and I'm curious about that. There's a small business across the street from me that does, like, a lot of stuff with tires, which I'm sure there's a lot of question marks about, like, the tires and how they recycle them and all that other da-da-da, right? And then I start to think, like, okay, well, how and when do I start to maybe break that, I guess I'll call it that fourth wall of, like, oh, do I go over and try to mm, build a relationship with the business across the street? Do I try to go down? Like, what advice do you have when people get to that point where they're like, okay, I feel like I might be ready to go talk to those people I don't know yet? Yeah.
So this is level 3, right? This is where people can have the average person. This is the place where they will have the most impact and the most important impacts, right? And so let me open up a couple of things with it. The first thing is, take a look at the places where you already have a connection and where you could think about, like I said, within a week or two, you could get to a person who could actually make a decision, right? And where you already have relationships, because there's a famous phrase that a lot of folks in movements use, which is relationships are the heart of social change. The relationships are where you have that about the change that could be created, right? And so one of the things that I'd say is, to use your analogies, if you don't have a connection to the tire store, right, then you're just going to be somebody walking in and being like, hey, tire guy, I'm going to talk to you about your livelihood and how you should change it. It's like, you're not a constituent. You don't have credibility. You don't have a skin in the game with that tire, right? Or the business there. So it's like the person is going to be like, why are you talking to me, right? The thing that I would say actually is, my encouragement is, the first place that people should look is in the career that they're already in, right? Because your career, and take a look at the work that you are in, for this folks, all folks in accounting, and think about, where could you help create change in your career and in the networks of your career? you know? And so, and then I'll talk in a minute, but it's also like also the accountant, or if you're an accountant working in a firm, right? Those are two huge areas that you could begin to work in. So let me just give off the top of my head a couple of examples, right? Oh, the other thing that I should say is, in the same way that I said, don't talk to the uncle who doesn't want to hear about climate change, talk to the people who do care. The same is also true when you step out into the world. Relationship is a hard change. Find people to do this with, find people who are interested in the change, and then see what skills you can offer. Right? So off the top of my head, there's every single nonprofit or community organization that is trying to figure out how to be more regenerative and sustainable needs an accountant. And help them figure out the finances and the numbers and the money. And, even if it's just looking over the books a little bit or saying, well, there's opportunities here, right? Every single one of them needs that. People feel like one of the dominant stories is that there is a contradiction between a thriving environment and a thriving economy. And you all in the Accounting Alchemy Network are at the position to change that story, not just in the grand level, which we can talk about at level 4, but at the individual level, right? And so, so let me actually take a step back. Doing an inventory of the skills that you have, that you think about what you can offer to organizations, like the skills and knowledge that you have. And doing some research and doing some preparation. Like after GCI, do some reading on, Alchemy Network. You guys have got tons. Like, what can accountants bring to the table in terms of the dialogue and the information? How, what can you do to change the dialogue? One example, that I was thinking about was anybody who's running a business or who has a building, your ability to come in and say, hey, I've been doing all this research on the ways in which you can save money by moving towards renewables. And by the way, I'm an accountant, not a hippie, right? Like now secretly you're all accountants and hippies. Right? You have a credibility to be in that conversation in a way that I do not, right? For all of my knowledge of regeneration, you will have vastly more, and you'll actually have the chops to get into that conversation with folks, right? I'll tell you just a quick story, but I worked at a school for 5 years, and that's where I really started to integrate regeneration. And the greenest person on campus was our CFO. Right? And the first thing that he did, like within a year of being there, is he got the entire school to have 80% of its power come from solar. And he did it through this very sophisticated finance deal that he did. This is back in 2008, like where he was doing this kind of leasing program. Blah, blah, blah. Then he went the element of the school and he figured out what he could change that would make it more renewable and save money. And by the time that he had done, he had knocked $300,000 off of the annual budget of that school and been more regenerative. Right? It was like everything from like what was happening. Like he was like, wait a minute, we're paying for all this money because we're an institution that has to haul trash. He's like, that's bogus. He's like, so he shifted everything and he put in a massive compost program. And then he got the guy who always wanted to start a school garden and he used the money to be able to do that. So they reduced the amount of waste. He took a look, he did an analysis of what we were doing for our heating systems. He, put in a more cost-effective and efficient heating system. He looked at what was happening with our lights. He switched everything to LEDs. It was all completely boring, mundane stuff. But he's now in the Bay Area. He's legendary. He now goes from school to school, showing them, he was like, you guys are wasting money by not being renewable and regenerative. That story sells.
So I love that story. And Will, I want an introduction to this person because we need his voice in the Accounting Alchemy room. Like, this is wonderful. So please, please, please connect us there. I love so much.
I love you. And he also, and it's just, so that's the thing. So it's like, so he was just self-taught. He just taught himself. He just got on the internet and he was like, this is stupid. He's like, I know renewables must be cheaper kind of innately. Like they're just, so he's won that dialogue. And then there's also the way, like, even if you don't have to be regenerative or you're getting the knowledge, like I said, any green organization needs advice on how to be better with their money. Mm-hmm. Most organizations, nonprofits and social movements rise or fall on how effectively they use money. and they're often paying accounting firms. Like, just volunteer your time.
Yeah.
And then they'll teach you about the politics of regeneration and the politics of renewable energy, stuff like that.
Well,
Anybody doing ecosystem restoration, like there's so many. Yeah.
No,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
We've got a little bit of an internet delay, so I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay. Okay.
Um, I'm just wanting to take that even like a little step further. You were saying any green organization. I would say any organization, whether they're green or not, recognizing that some of the most profound level 3 action we can take is simply with the clients that we have, whoever they may be. That there are ways that we can look at the client's books and we're going to notice things that they're not going to notice, and we can make recommendations. And it's not necessarily making recommendations of, oh, you should do this, you should do that. We try to avoid the shoulds as much as possible.
Yeah.
But inquiring with the client, what are your values? What is important to you? Are you living your values through your financial decisions? And that's also a great way for us as accountants to figure out, are we working with the right clients? Do we share values with the people that we're working with? Because if we're working with some corrupt mega corporation that makes us feel sick and is keeping us from sleeping at night, like, I'm helping this business succeed, fire them. Find a better client that actually shares your values, that you're excited to meet with, that you're excited to help them grow and thrive, and support them in co-creating the change that we want to see in the world. What would it look like for us to actually get to surround ourselves with people that we enjoy working with? Those are the right clients.
Yeah. And what I'll say is, and it's a loop, right? Like, you don't have to fire your clients tomorrow, but maybe go look for a client who's actually, go work for the solar company. See if they can be a client of yours. Go work for the company that's just, that they're just a office supply management corporation, but they're really serious around cleaning up their supply chain. If you go work for them as an accountant, you will learn about cleaning up a supply chain, right? You will start to know the ins and the outs of the businesses. I mean, to go to, Matthew, the prize is the checklist. I mean, I'd be interested, like something the Alchemy Network could do is just make a checklist of everything that like a personal client could think about as ways to move towards saving money and being more renewable and regenerative. So an example being, so many states now have tax rebates for moving towards renewable energy, moving towards more sustainability. Like, each one of your members could just have a checklist of that they could say, like, by the way, did you know that, I mean, in California, you can get like $7,500 off of a used EV or hybrid. And a lot of folks don't even know that. And it's a tax rebate, So your ability to just like, you don't even have to like, this is what Bob Oxenberg, the CFO at the school that I worked with, was the master at. He led the conversation with money, and then he got them into the green conversation, And just to say, in terms of the power of this, a lot of people think that people take action on what they believe in. But actually, the social psychology studies are very clear on this. People start to believe in what they take action on. It's a reverse of how we think change happens. If you get somebody to like start, moving towards renewables and getting an EV and stuff like that, the way that the brain goes is, well, if I'm doing this, it must be a good idea. And so it's funny, it starts to change the belief structure that people become more green. If they go in saving money, it's not just going to be a transactional mercenary sort of thing. It actually moves people towards actually taking being regenerative more seriously, because they started with getting the EV because they were going to save money. So it's really, so that, y'all have this kind of great position to be able to like get people to take action for financial reasons, but then start to look at the bigger picture. So I think, I mean, last thing I would say about kind of this level 3 action is, one of the folks, Ingrid, that Jessica Lusky, who's the psychologist, has also done work in like just using the term activism can be really off-putting for folks. Like, when you talked about social activism, a lot of folks, especially kind of anybody Gen X or older, we tend to have the 1960s version that it's, fist in the air and a bullhorn and confrontational, and right. And so that actually stops people. They think, who do I have to become to ask for change? That's not at all true. There are so many different avenues of change, right? There's the person who quietly researches information in the back and gives other people information that they go and speak about it. There's the person who is just good at the small conversations, right? I would imagine as an accountant, as somebody who's like, look, do not ask me to stand up in front of the room and talk about the regenerative future that we need. But if you want to hand me a pile of spreadsheets, I'm a person, right? That is so critical for, and you don't have to be confrontational. And in fact, being somebody who can actually work quietly, the person who just does the work is a really powerful form of activism. And then maybe you are a person who gets up and talks in front of the room and is great with it. Great. So it's doing inventory and just think about, where am I successful in my career? What am I good at? And I guarantee that every one of those will be exactly who you can be in terms of your form of social change. Then it's just linking with people who are doing the other parts of the social change and coming forward and saying, well, this is my skills. How can you use me? Right? And saying, and this is the kind of change that I don't really want to do, so please don't ask me to. It is absolutely okay to do that. People feel like they just got to show up for whatever is going to happen. It's not the case. You do not have to be, you do not have to be the person who gets arrested to be effective at social change. Right? But relationships are the heart of social change. If you go in and ask and say, this is what I can do, this is what I would not be comfortable doing, but this is the kind of work that I would love to do, you are a gift to any group of people who are looking to do social change.
Yeah. What I love about what you're sharing, going all the way back to the CFO, Bob, I believe his name was, and in these examples that you're giving, it's like, I think, again, with accountants, right? It's like we are in the midst of tax season, right? And that season is one of those seasons where it's almost like accountants just don't have time to do anything else, right? And now we're saying, hey, by the way, we want you to change the planet, right? While you're at it, and I think that sort of initial reaction is like, oh gosh, you're asking me to do something that's completely out of my realm of comfort and skill sets, and it's like I'm running left and you're asking me to go right, and that's just too much to ask for. But actually, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, you're inviting accountants to do what they already do, right? And to bring that skill set to the table to serve organizations and communities that simply need what they already have the ability to do, right? So it's not asking them to, learn an entirely new skill set and then go jump into the deep end of that skill set. And so that's really empowering, because it's like, well, that makes it very accessible. And I think the other thing that's sort of coming up for me too is this idea of how, like, one of the things that we talk about a lot is how accountants are the stewards of the money story, or part. Well, it's not. Well, they're not the solely responsible in stewarding the money story, but we have a lot of influence, right? We're talking to our clients every day about how they're using their money, and it goes back to Ingrid's point about, yeah, okay, are you using your money in alignment with your values? And even simply asking that question, right? Oh, that's a strange question for accountants to ask their clients, like, hey, is this an expression of your values? And I think that's amazing, because again, it's we're already having the conversations, and so by being aware and then asking the question, you even if you don't get a clear answer, or there's no resolve around the answer, the fact that you asked the question is enough to plant the seed of curiosity that then, maybe a year later, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, will actually shift the mindset of that business owner to be like, wait a second, I remember when my accountant asked me this question, and now I'm making a purchasing decision, and I'm going to make a different decision than I did last year. Okay, got it. Right. So I guess my curiosity for you is, it's kind of around this piece around stewarding the money story, because I think one of the other things that I confront in the container of changing systems, particularly as somebody who is in the accounting industry, so I'm very aware of it, is when I interact with individuals who are sort of anti-money, right? Like, oh, money's the devil, money's bad, you know, anything related to money, 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 horrible, evil, the darkness. It's like there's sort of a repellent energy towards that. And so I guess I'm curious, this might be more of like a personal question for you, Will, than it is yeah, more, yeah. And I'm curious, like, what your own relationship is to money, and what your perspective is on money that isn't a anti-money story, perhaps, but it sounds like possibly one that's more collaborative and more aligned with acknowledging that money is a tool that we can use to transform things. I'm curious about what your relationship is to money.
Yeah. Gather my thoughts on that. I love the question. Because I've definitely over the course of my life had a real change. You know, I think when I started in my more radical 20s, I was in I was in the kind of, money and power are the roots of all evil. And I am in a very different place now. Like for me, money is a really powerful tool. And what I think my relationship with money is that what money does is it demonstrates who somebody really is, right? Same as when you hand somebody power, you get to find out who they really are. And that's intense and scary, right? Because I think most folks, one of my feelings is the kind of the money is the root of all evil kind of mindset. What I find is that it's also people who are to step forward into leadership and power, or want everything to be flat and non-hierarchical. Because it's a sense of power innately corrupts. I'm like, no, I think my experience is that what power does is it reveals the parts of ourselves that we weren't ready to look at. And so it's the fears of things. And so it's this ability to kind of, what is my confidence in relating to having the ability to take action to shape the world? And then the next question is, will I do it collaboratively, or will the power go to my head? And I'll decide, well, since I've been given the magic wand of money, now I know how the world needs to be shaped, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, a lot of folks, when I started doing regenerative, would constantly ask me, they were like, we'll never have a thriving environment under capitalism. And my response was, and if you've got, we've got about a 30-year time horizon for really deep trouble in terms of what's happening with the environment and climate. And so I'm like, so if y'all can tell me how we're fix and transform capitalism in the next 5 years, and that we've got the 25 years to do the planetary healing that we need to do, I am all ears. But nobody can. And so for now, this is the system that we are working with. We are going to work with a world system based largely on money. And instead of feeling like money is the root of all evil, in my mind, it's like, we need to work with this a lot better. We need to do things like learn how to align money and values. And I'm going to do something harder, which is humanity needs to grow up, kind of collectively. And one of the ways to do that is to look at how we're using money and understanding how it moves around and make it work towards the world that we're trying to create. And understanding that there are elements of, and we're getting to that. I actually have a lot of thoughtfulness. I haven't tried to articulate it so in a quick way. So I'm not going to try not to go off to a whole realm of theory, but let me see if I can pull myself back onto a kind of a more direct path. I think at the level at which most of us are going to work, which is, level 1, 2, 3, we have a lot of power to get how money is used in a way that is effective. And I think it's also important for us to be very clear-eyed in the way that people don't use money and power well. And that's why relationships, accountability, systems, checks, and balances are so important. And so being able to give people, I love this phrase that you're the stewards of the money story. This is why I said at the beginning that I feel like, the Accounting Alchemy Network is so important, because I agree. And that, your ability to kind of hear an accountant say, actually, you really want to look at the relationship of in your money and how you're spending it, and you have choices, and there are financially viable and even financially beneficial choices that you could make in a better direction, cracks a story that most people have no idea how to touch, because they're terrified of money, and or if they're good with money, they're so afraid of risks in relationship to it, especially for something as untried as like regenerative systems. So your ability to come in and say, no, 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 you can make choices over time that steer towards something which is better for you, better for your families, better for your financial planet. All of this, it's like I said, if I say that, people will be like, nice theory, right? If you say that, people can actually listen to you with authority, right? And this is where I just want to say, just to complete out our kind of tour through the 4 levels, this is where y'all have a level 4 power, right? When you change the story, when you change the culture, that's level 4. It's economy, politics, culture, right? It's the grand story. So coming in and showing it in a really pragmatic way, like A, just speaking from being an accountant, but then B, being able to pull out the spreadsheet and go, see, the numbers add up a lot better, right? Like that's an extraordinary power that few people have.
I love all of that so much. And I feel like that ties right back into what you were saying earlier about something the Accounting Alchemy Network can do is create checklists for people of like, here are some simple things that you can do. And that transition from level 3 to level 4 does not actually need to be incredibly huge and challenging for those of us, many of us do teach, whether it be teaching with our clients or, within companies, corporations, or speaking at conferences, those sorts of things. Taking that checklist and doing a presentation on it to a new audience is a level 4 action.
Yeah,
You-
I think so. Anything that I just kind of release out into the world through the internet, I
yeah.
consider action, right?
Well, and also creating those educational tools within the Accounting Alchemy Network where we consider just about everything that we're doing open source and Creative Commons.
Yeah.
By all means, if we're talking about something on one of these Lyceums or posting about it in our Hilo or posting about it, on social media, on LinkedIn or something like that, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's an amazing idea. I want to take this idea and run with it. Write an article, level 4 action. Go speak about it at a conference, level 4 action. There are so many ideas that I present on a regular basis that are ideas where I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. You mentioned melanoma sommeil before our call, Will, and just like thinking about one of my favorite quotes is the idea that conflict is the spirit of a relationship asking itself to deepen. And that's a quote from that person. Really feeling into some of these big ideas, they don't necessarily need to be completely original ideas. They are a distillation of all of the amazing ideas that we are bringing in from around ourselves and then figuring out through our own learning process what is mine to do and then sharing those ideas with others. And it's going to be messy because we're human beings. And let's embrace the mess and be vulnerable about it and get rid of the imposter syndrome and just invite everyone into the conversation to join us. And so, with that, in our 5 minutes that we have left, I want to talk about action. What does it look like to actually be accountable to change? Recognizing that continuing the same habits and expecting things to change around us, that's not going to work. So if we need to change something, and like Matthew was talking about, okay, one little step, I'm going to start using a compost thing. When somebody says, oh, I should be doing this, and then they transition into what does the first step of doing that actually look like? And then how do we actually hold ourselves accountable to taking that step? And what does it look like to really take action?
Okay. I want to offer 2 things. I want to offer a concrete action, which you kind of pointed towards. Then I want to talk a little bit more broad picture. It just occurs to me that if, something that the Accounting Alchemy Network could do is use the 4 levels of change and think about from an accountant's lens, from a money manager's lens, what is, give me a list of level action I could take in terms of how I'm using my money. Give me a list of level 2 conversations that I could be having with my family that I could work through. What should every organization, institution be doing? And then maybe level 4, like whatever you do with that, like changing the story of the money. But I can say, in general, that would be. This is something which has been a gap as in the organizing work that I've been doing. Is just creating checklists of people like, what do I do? What do I do? And then everybody says like, change your light bulb representative. I'm like, no. How about like take advantage of this tax credit with your family because like very concrete things like that. And that's something that your folks could think about. Well, when's the right time to have this conversation with my client? So that's one thought would be just kind of like take the level 4 and turn it into specific actions that people could take. But in terms of how somebody takes action, the first is, and Ingrid, you're heavily involved in this, but we do have an action training that follows on from GCI, which is about like leading people through the steps of taking action. But to give an overview of that, I would say I think the steps would be this, which is first, get grounded, get in touch with yourself, reconnect with nature, and be quiet and just ask yourself, like, what is the change that I could do? What is the change that I feel called to do? The next piece then is to just think through and do level 1, do level 2, right? But I'm going to talk about level 3, right? Because that's the one I think people can figure out level 1, level 2. But think through your community. Just take a piece of paper and just write down everyone who you think that you could, be involved in that change with. Do 20 minutes of internet research and find out who in your community is already doing this change, right? Whether it's like getting solar panels on the local school or doing a tree planting operation or whatever. Like just find out what's happening and talk to your friends and family about like, do we know anybody who's doing this? Like, I'd be interested in getting involved in this. Like your network will turn people up. Then go talk to them. Say, this is interested in getting involved. This is what I would like to do. Here are my skills. And here's what I'm not comfortable doing, but how could I help you? How could I contribute? Right? Build the relationships with people already involved in change. They will teach you the skills of being involved in change because it's a skill set. It's a professional skill set, just like being an accountant. It's oddly the only one that we don't teach in our schools, which is how to actually make a change. It's a massive gap, but it's there. You can learn it from the people who learned it on the job, and then work with them and sit down and make a plan. Just make a plan and a timeline. Make it reasonable. Don't try to change the world. Have something that you can do in about 3 months. About 3 months of good, steady work, a couple hours a week, we could make change. Because you want to just know what it feels like to actually successfully make a change. Because once you've done that one time, you'll be like, okay, what do I do next? And you go through the same process. Go to nature, be quiet, think about the change you want, talk to your friends and family to see who's doing it, connect with those folks, make a plan, take action. It could be small, it could be large, right? But that's the cycle of action. And every time you do it, you're just building another layer of networks and learning and another group of folks who broadens out your friends and family and gives you more and more people to do this work with.
And like you said earlier, make it fun.
Make it fun. Yeah, make it fun. No meetings without food. Have meetings at go. Seriously, that's what I was taught earlier. No meetings without food. Throw parties with your friends. Like have a dinner with your friends where you talk about this. Just like always make it a reason to socialize and hang out and talk about changing the world in really cool ways.
I love that. And I love that we're doing some of those things in the Accounting Alchemy Network already. For anyone watching this who hasn't been participating in our monthly Regenerative Accounting Cafe calls, oh my gosh, those conversations are just, Will, you would nerd out. The last Regenerative Accounting Cafe, we got into conversations around regenerative governance and how accountants can create tax reform and like multiple levels of action. And like, there's different ways that we can enact some of this, whether it be, writing to our legislators, or what would it look like for accountants to strike and say, no, really, we are not filing another tax return until you simplify the tax code.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think y'all as a profession are at the crux of just so much.
So
And we
many
need
fun
you.
things.
Yeah.
Well, and like you were saying, the action training course that comes, well, often after the Game Changer Intensive, but now we have revamped that course a little bit to make it so the Game Changer Intensive does not need to be a prerequisite. And for anyone who's interested, Matthew and I are looking at putting together a cohort of that Game Changer action training. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to us, whether or not you've done the Game Changer Intensive before. We would love to put together a group of people who want to go through this together where it can be fun. And we also have our Accounting Alchemy retreat coming up in person in Eugene, Oregon in April. So if that's something that you're interested in joining us for, it will be fun and there will be food. And we're basically going to be camping at Ben's place in Eugene. So all kinds of fun things going on. And I'm curious if there's any final thoughts, given that we're a couple minutes past the hour, from Matthew, or any parting gems of wisdom. Well, we've got you I've got you here in the room, Will.
Yeah, let's start with you, Will, and then I'll do a wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been the theme that I'm feeling, which is just like if you're in the AAN, my sense is that you feel a calling and a tug to do something. And so listen to that and nurture it. Don't ask too much from it, but really listen to it. Listen to the quietness of it, and then also don't feel like you've got to change the world. Change what you can already touch, um, and but do it. Just do it. Just start. Just start. Stay curious. Learn from your mistakes. It's not as hard as it looks.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Will. Yeah, and for those of you who, again, who are new to the Accounting Alchemy Network, watching this on YouTube, go to our website, accountingalchemy.net, join our newsletter, and also understand that where you're at is actually perfect, right? That like I think one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation is, um, you know, you don't have to be anything but who you are and acknowledge your superpower, right? Because you have, as has been evidenced in this, and I think one of my biggest takeaways was this piece around the story of the CFO who literally was like, no, I'm going to talk about this in the context of numbers, and I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to initiate the change. And I think there's this myth about money and business and social transformation for positive impact on the planet, that they're somehow like opposite of each other. And actually, this is just demonstrating that no, actually, they're deeply intertwined. And the accountant is the exact person who can literally have that conversation once they've done a little bit of work on themselves and have started to relate to the community outside of them, right? And so I think it's huge opportunity to really take ownership of the power that we have as accounting professionals. Yeah. So anything else, Ingrid, to close it out?
I think this was just wonderful. Thank you so much, Will, for joining us today. And we are excited to continue weaving together all of these wonderful ideas between the Accounting Alchemy Network and the Pachamama Alliance. I just so am loving this partnership that we have going with you, and so appreciate the educational resources that you and other members of the Pachamama Alliance have created. And I'm excited to amplify that out into the world. So thank you again so much for all of the work that you've done in the past and for joining us today. And look forward to finding more excuses to play with you in the future, because playing with you is just such a joy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.